afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for sticking around right to the end of the day, which is fantastic. It's always great. It's a true sign of your determination. Anthony is our fourth speaker for the day, and what a great start it's been to Journalism Week already. We heard from Tom Bauer this morning, who opened with some fantastic stories about his investigative journalism work, all the way up to Rachel, who spoke so passionately about new forms of storytelling, much of which we will be doing in our second semester, particularly with our second year students. So I'm sure many of you will be looking forward to that. I'm really pleased to announce our final guest for today, who is Anthony Dhanendran. Him and I go way back, 13 years actually, all the way to City University in London, where he was one of my tutors. And our paths have crossed many times over the years, mainly at conferences. The last time was at a Google conference down in London, where I was able to convince him to come in to talk to you guys about the work that he does at BBC Top Gear, where he leads their digital innovation work. He basically decides how the BBC Top Gear team gets to spend its money, which I suppose is really crucial, considering that they use our money at the BBC, don't they? And perhaps you'll tell us a little bit about the amazing amount of resources that they have, which Rachel alluded to in her talk earlier. So I'm sure it's going to be wonderful. I'm really looking forward to it. I hope you are too. So over to you, Anthony.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Anthony. I work for Top Gear. I should say at the start that if any of you are here for juicy gossip about Top Gear, I'm afraid you're going to be disappointed, because I'm not. Oh, thanks. I'm not really here to talk about the show particularly. I'm here to talk about the digital product, which is what we call the website, and I'll come on to what that means in a minute. So, I keep hearing people say things like this, that journalism is dead, which obviously is worrying to me, because I work in journalism. It's worrying to you, because most of you, I guess, will want to work in journalism. But I don't think it is. I think that bits of journalism are dying, newspapers possibly, although I saw a lot of people reading the Yorkshire Post on the train earlier, which is a good sign. Some print magazines are dying, some websites are dying, but I don't think journalism is going anywhere. And what I'm here to talk about today is how we make journalism work in the future. So, I work for Top Gear. We do things like this. That's not me. I have tried to do that. It went very badly wrong. That is my colleague Chris Harris, who is one of the show presenters, who is expertly drifting that alpha around the corner. So Top Gear. Everybody knows what Top Gear is. We have one of the world's best known TV shows. We have a magazine which reaches something like 8 million people across the world through our UK edition and various licensed editions. And we have the web, where we reach several million people a month. And on the web, we offer independent car news and car buying advice. So we have a lot of reviews on there. If you are in the market for a new car or a used car, then you can come and have a look, and we'll tell you what to buy. And we are independent of the show in the sense that the people who write for the magazine and the web are not always the presenters. We do have Rory and Chris from the show who write for us, but we have expert car journalists as well who write for us. I'm going to get rid of that car because it's a bit overbearing. So I'll come to this in a minute, but yeah, so Top Gear is all of those things, and we do try and link them together. We're doing more of that, trying to link the TV show to the web, to the magazine, and again, I'll come on to those things. So I studied engineering and computer science for my degree. I got working on the student paper in Bristol, which led to applying to journalism school. I went to City, where I met Dean. After that, I tried to freelance for a bit. I was very bad at that. You need really good discipline to be a freelancer. I don't have it. So fortunately for me, I got a job as a staff writer on what was then the UK's biggest selling technology magazine called Computer Active. So I became reviews editor of Computer Active, and in 2011 I decided I wanted to do something different, so I left to try something new. I took a job at the BBC working in editorial on a thing called Global iPlayer, which was the international version of the iPlayer. It was a trial project that we ended up closing after a few years because it wasn't really working out. I found myself doing more and more of product and less of words and pictures. And again, I'll explain what product means in a minute. And eventually I moved into full-time product management about 2 years ago, where I work on Top Gear and sometimes BBC Good Food. This is a tweet from Simon Cooper of the FT. I don't know if you can read it, but I will share all these links later on. He's talking about when he entered journalism. He says in 1995 it was a pretty cushy business. Even mediocrities and alcoholics could have long, well-paid journalistic careers. When I started out, deadlines were about 6 p.m, after which, since rolling news websites hadn't been invented yet, everyone went to the pub. I caught the tail end of that, so I started in about 2002 as a full-time journalist. There was a bit of that. I had some good times as a journalist. The first press trip I went on was to Pierre Cardin's house in Cannes, and there were actual supermodels there, and it was pretty good. But the problem was that nothing lived up to that afterwards, which is a bit of a shame. So, back in the days of the thundering printing presses beneath Fleet Street, you actually didn't know that much about who your readers were. Incidentally, I'm going to tell you something about Rupert Murdoch. So I really admire Rupert Murdoch. That's a terrible thing to say in this day and age. Not for his politics, but the guy is a proper newspaper man. He's got ink running through his blood. And I was reading a story about him just the other day, about when he bought The Sun in 1969. In November 1969, Rupert Murdoch bought The Sun, which was then a left-wing trade union broadsheet. Everybody knows what a broadsheet is, right? And he wanted to turn it into a populist tabloid. And he went down to the massive print room at Bouverie Street, next to Fleet Street, where there was one of these. And he said to the print foreman, who was a big burly guy, I want to print The Sun as a tabloid. The guy says, you can't do it. And Murdoch says, look, get out of the way, I'll show you. And he goes over, to the horror of this print foreman, starts pulling levers and pressing switches, and 5 minutes later says, run the presses, and suddenly The Sun was printing tabloids. He really knows his stuff, and I think it's good advice to, even these days, though he's gone a bit mad if you follow his tweets, it's good advice to watch what Rupert Murdoch does, because he, more than anyone else, more than any other press baron, more than Robert Maxwell or Viscount Rothermere or the Lebedevs who own The Independent, Murdoch is a proper news person. And I've got a lot of sort of romantic admiration for old-fashioned news. But that brings us on to new news, if you like. So, we didn't know much about our readers in those days. You'd go and buy your paper from this guy. Maybe get some polos on the side. There's the papers down there. But you'd go home and you'd read it, and the people who made the newspaper have no idea who you are. The newspaper might run competitions or have phone lines where you can phone in and give them tips or whatever. But that only goes a certain way. That was the days of these two books. If you haven't read them and you're interested in journalism, they're really good, they're really funny, they're both fiction. They're both about those sort of glory days of Fleet Street, the 30s and 40s. They're really, really funny and worth reading. But as much as those were the glory days, we didn't actually know anything about who we were talking to. So nowadays, we've got things like this. This is much less romantic, but it's a list of what we call market segments. So these are groups of people who come and visit our websites. It looks like the most boring thing in the world, but I promise you I'll make it more interesting. And if your publication is behind a paywall, like the FT is, then you can know a bit more about your users. Because in order to sign up, they have to give you some details. The FT does this really well because it caters to a specialist market. It's harder to do that if you are talking to a general interest audience. The Sun tried to do a paywall relatively recently, and they couldn't make it work. I suspect that's because the extra information they got from the people signing up didn't really tell them any more than they already knew. You know, if you're the Sun, you sort of know what your readers are coming for. So they couldn't make any more money from it. But there are opportunities from knowing this stuff. And there are also opportunities from the new technology and the new gadgets and gizmos and the new ways of working. So Rachel, if you caught her presentation, that's a really good example of how new technology is enabling new ways of storytelling. This isn't particularly a new way of storytelling, but it was enabled by having tiny cameras that allowed the BuzzFeed News people to follow the Leica Mobile, some fairly senior people at Leica Mobile doing really weird stuff with massive bags of cash last year. I've picked that out because I think BuzzFeed doesn't get celebrated enough for its hard news coverage. They actually followed all these people around. That's a really, really good story, and it's a good use of technology. The cameras to do that just weren't available until recently. This story was from the New York Times at the weekend. I picked it out because it's about design, and it touches on a lot of the stuff that I'm going to talk about in a bit. But also the form of it is really interesting. It's a bit like the shorthand stuff that Rachel was talking about. It's a really beautiful story to read through, so have a look. So, let's talk about Top Gear. This is topgear.com. This is our website. There's some news there. The blue thing at the bottom is a video. There's a review, and thing next to it is a video. We've got stuff about the show. We've got stuff about our magazine. We've got some reviews on there. We've got a lot of news. And the site acts as both an editorial site, so we have writers. We have a team of writers and really excellent photographers. All of that photography is ours. We don't use any stock photography. Well, we don't use very much. But we also act as a kind of shop front for the show. So, as you know, the show has been going through some interesting times. I heard someone just before I started saying, who's going to ask him about Clarkson? So, as you know, we lost our 3 presenters 18 months ago. Yeah. We were in the process of redesigning the website at the time. So it was kind of fortuitous because it gave us a fresh start on both counts. I don't think it's any secret that Series 23, which was the one fronted by Chris Evans and Matt, wasn't quite the success of previous series. But we are very, very confident in the new team, or the revised team with Matt and Chris Harris and Rory. And that is currently filming at the moment. So the team are off doing, the TV team are off doing really fascinating stuff in various countries. Incidentally, Rory, who is one of the presenters of the new show, Rory and I started off at the same magazine at Computer Active about 13 years ago. So he's a really good example of following what you want to do and getting to where you want to be. The guy's now a really, really famous, really, really big motoring presenter because having started in tech journalism, he moved into doing videos about tech and then doing videos about car tech and then doing videos about cars. and that's where he is. So I'm not kind of big on follow your dreams stuff, but I think Rory's a very good example of if you want to be somewhere, if you want to do something in journalism, go and do it. So the other site we do is BBC Good Food. So these two sites are published by BBC Worldwide, which is the bit of the BBC that I work for. So a bit about the BBC. The BBC is very big. We have an annual revenue of about £4 billion, which comes from the licence fee. We're the world's largest news gathering organisation, so we employ 8,000 journalists across the world. And BBC Worldwide, in terms of people, is a very small part of that. So we have about 1,000 people in West London and around the world. BBC Worldwide's main job is to make money for the BBC. So we turn over about £1 billion, a bit more than that, and we return of that about £150 million in profit, which goes straight back to the BBC, which is our owner, and that comes off everyone's licence fees. So effectively, the profit that BBC Worldwide makes reduces our licence fees. But just to be very clear on something Dean said, Top Gear and Good Food, the bits of Top Gear and Good Food that you can see here are fully commercial. So we serve ads. The ads seem to have disappeared off that page. But we serve ads, and that's how we make money. And we don't take any licence fee money to do that. So they are kind of independent of the BBC itself. Anyway, that's an aside. Good Food is a really, really massive website. It's actually bigger than Top Gear. We get about 20 million people a month using it. And Christmas is by far the biggest time. So this Christmas, about 1 in 4 British people over 16 will visit our website to look for Christmas recipes. This recipe here is incredibly popular every February. That's our biggest day of the year. It's quite weird. But this recipe will see about 30,000 people every minute reading it and trying to cook it. So back to Top Gear. This is further down the front page that I showed you earlier. More reviews, more news, more videos, and I'll talk a bit about what I do. I'm not totally sure what I do, to be honest. This t-shirt says, being a product manager is like riding a bike, except the bike is on fire and you're on fire, and everything is on fire and you're in hell. It's sort of like that sometimes. So what Dean said, what I gave them for the blurb is I decide how we most wisely spend our money, which is sort of what it boils down to. I think someone asked Rachel in the previous talk about how much it would cost to use their service, and it was very expensive. It was $400 a month, wasn't it? And she said, go and find out how much a software developer costs. Software developers cost a ridiculous amount of money, and we employ about 10 of them to do Top Gear and Good Food. So the job of the product manager is to make sure that the business is getting good value from all those people who cost a lot more than the journalists. Which brings me to another aside, which is if any of you are interested in that side of things, if you want to get into editorial development, it's a really good field to be in. So BuzzFeed, I keep going back to BuzzFeed because they do a lot of interesting stuff. BuzzFeed have editorial developers. So my software developers, basically, they answer to me and I decide what we spend the money on, broadly speaking. The editorial developers at BuzzFeed sit with the journalists, and if the journalists want to make what's in the news today that's not totally horrifying, like Trump. Let's say Trump. If you want to make a game where you kick Donald Trump, right? they can do that, and they can do that within 2 hours. So they did, a lot of the BuzzFeed developers came from a site called Us versus Them, which was at the Mirror. It lasted about a year or so. It was really clever. They did some nice stuff. They did a game called Kicking Michael Gove. I think it might have been Kicking Michael Gove up the arse. Or maybe it was Punching Michael Gove. Anyway, it was doing something bad to Michael Gove. And they had that live within like 2 hours of him being appointed as, I think, Education Secretary. It's a really silly thing, but it got a lot of people visiting their site. It got a lot of engagement around their site. It got a lot of shares. So there's a lot of opportunity for people who are interested in both journalism and the tech side of things. And you don't have to be a massive nerd. You have to be interested in problem solving. That's basically what software development programming is. And I think any of you at this stage of your life, or even later, if you want to get into that sort of thing, there's a lot of opportunity there. So, product management. This is what I do. UX is what we call user experience. So that's one aspect. We want to make sure that what we do is good for the users. Tech is the developers, and the business is the people who hold the purse strings. So basically, whenever someone comes to me with a bright idea, we have to answer these questions. What is it? How does it fit into what we already do? How does it fit into the world? How do we talk to users about it? How will it grow? How do users interact with it, and what does it mean for the business? So, to give you a small example, the editorial team came up to me recently, one of them, and said, we want to embed Facebook video. They want to get video of the latest Lambo posted from the latest Lamborghini posted from Lamborghini's Facebook page, which we can't do at the moment. So I've got 10 different things that I need to, that people have asked me to do. So this has to fit in to those things. So the questions I have to try and figure out the answers to are these. What's the point of it? How will it help us? Ultimately, it comes down to how will it make us money? And that sounds quite cynical and sort of money grabbing, but ultimately journalism does have to pay for itself, even at the BBC. And I think there are good ways of doing that. You know, things coming down to money might mean making things that people want to come and use. And if you do that, then you make money from them because we serve them ads. We don't want to be in a position where we're just gouging every last penny out of our users, out of horrible ads and things, because then they just won't come back. So how do we do it? This is an impact map. So on the left of the map is a blue thing that says increase ad impressions. That's the goal for a piece of work that we're doing at the moment to try and make our reviews section a bit better. The orange and red things that go down the side, I should just say, please don't tweet that photo. Don't tweet a photo if you want to take a photo of this, or stick it online. It is sort of confidential. I know it's being live streamed, but you know. So the orange and red things are people. They're people who come to our website. At the top it says car buyers, so that's people who are in the market for a new car. The next one is car browsers, so that's people like me, because I don't have any money for a new car, but I do find myself browsing new cars that I can't afford. The next one is enthusiasts, so those are people who are interested in the Ferraris and the Porsches that we review, but they're probably not going to buy a new car. They're certainly not going to buy a new Ferrari. And at the bottom is another type of audience. My job can get quite psychological. We'll come to a bit of this later. But the green bits are behavioural changes. So it does get a bit sort of Minority Report at this point. Those are things that we want to change in the people. So, for instance, that second one down says return visit. So those car buyers, we want them to return. The top one says read more reviews, so we want them to read more of the reviews if they come to us in the first place. And then the grey things are things that we can actually do on the site, like better ways to surface related reviews or car comparisons and things like that. So these are the questions that I'm trying to answer. That translates into something like this, which is a board, which is what rules our developers' lives. These are actual live things that were on the board this morning. Most of them won't mean anything to anybody, but they are things that we want to do on the site. So those are things that the editors have asked for, that the ads people have asked for, or that I want to do to make the site better. So some of the things that why do we want to do this? Why can't we just, why can't the website just be as it is? And that's because there are new challenges every day, every week. One of which is ad blocking. So how many people use an ad blocker? That's probably 20, 30%. That's about what we've seen on our sites. This survey reckons it's 40%. I think people using ad blockers is quite understandable. I think ads can be really intrusive, can be really ugly, and can really get in the way of trying to actually read stuff online. So one of the questions we are trying to answer at the moment, both me and my team and as an industry, is how on earth we fix that. Because if 40% of the people who visit us don't see any ads, then we're making 40% less money than we would expect to be. But the answer to that isn't to try and block the ad blockers. It might be what The Guardian are doing and what a couple of other people are doing, City AM are doing it, where you put up a thing saying, we noticed you're using an ad blocker, would you like to pay us some money or turn it off? I kind of feel that's a bit needy and it doesn't look great. But that might be a way to do it. Or there are various initiatives around to try and make ads better. But the ad blocking, sometimes you get a cliche stuck in your head. I can't get the phrase genie out of the bottle out of my head. I was trying not to use it, but the ad blocking genie is out of the bottle and it's not going back in. So ad blocking is here to stay, and we've got to figure out how to do it, how to fix it. So I live in a world of data. This is quite a lot of data about topgear.com. On the left, you've got some stuff from our analytics. Again, please don't share any of this. So you've got the number of users we had in the last 30 days, number of page views. Mobile versus desktop, Rachel again was talking about 50%. We're currently seeing a bit more than that, so about 2/3 of people view Top Gear on a mobile. We've had 420 million Facebook engagements down there. And this stuff is all about the site. So is the site up? Is it running quickly? Because these are the things that I have to care about, like how many seconds is it taking to load the page? Because Google cares about that stuff. And if we take too long to load the page, then Google pushes us down in the rankings. What I would say at this point is, if some of your eyes, you're all doing a good impression of looking engaged, but if your eyes are glazing over at this stuff and you're saying, what's the relevance to actually being a journalist? I would say that for a lot of people, you don't need to care about this stuff. You don't need to know what the ping time of the website you write for in 5 years' time. You don't need to know what that is. I do think that journalists make really good product managers because they know the audience. If you spend a few years working as a journalist, you know your stuff, you know the site that you work for, you know your audience, you get readers' letters, you tweet them, and you sort of empathise with the audience. I think journalists end up making really good product managers. You don't need to be particularly technical. So bear it in mind if if you're looking for things for the future. But on the other hand, if you're not interested in any of these things, I would just say that it's useful to know what the product people do. There will be product people at any publication of any size that any of you go and work for. And it's worth knowing how they work, what they do. It's worth knowing, A, that you can ask for stuff. If you want to embed a shorthand story, the stuff that Rachel was showing off on your website, you can go and say to the product person, can we do this? They'll probably say no, but you can ask, and it's worth asking. And some of the best suggestions that we've had have come from our editorial people at whatever level, who've just said, well, can we do this? And can we make it work? So partly it's just a plea to say, know that there are people out there who look after this stuff and that you can ask them things. So this is a wall of data, and you've kind of got to be wary of it, in that you can know a bit too much about your audience, and that means you don't really know anything about them. But I'm going to take you through some of the things we do with our data and some of the ways we find out about how people are using our websites. So this is a survey tool that we installed on Good Food about a year ago. It pops up a little thing if you've been on the site for a little while, and it says, do you want to give us a sentence about what you think of the site and a score, which is the NPS. So a lot of them are really nice. NPS 10, less ads would be nice, well, fine. Great suggestions, and I hate using your website, which is always fun. There's a lot worse than that as well. But that is a good way of finding out what people think. So we can output these to a spreadsheet. We can search them. So one of the things we did was trying to figure out how well our printing tools were working, because people want to print recipes. You don't necessarily want to take your iPad into the kitchen and get it covered in flour. So people print recipes. So we just search this for print, and you get a lot of great stuff from there that says, it's terrible, I can't print, or it's great, printing works really well. It's also useful for the editorial people, because some of the people said, well, can we have more vegan recipes, or things like that. This is moving on to, it's kind of the other end of the scale. So that was people who visit the website, we ask them a quick thing and then they leave. This is a usability testing lab. We've got one of these in our building. It's not this one, but it looks a lot like it. So that's a two-way mirror there. I'm never quite sure whether they're one-way mirrors or two-way mirrors, but anyway, it looks like a mirror to the person on the other side of that, and it's actually a piece of glass, so you can see in and see what they're doing. And that's designed to look like it's an office or it's a living room or something. And the woman there is using the website. There'll be cameras pointed at her eyes. There'll be cameras pointed at her hands. You can see something there, just about. You can see that's a downward-facing camera that's looking at what she's doing. And we sit there with them. We ask them questions. So, can you do this? Can you find this? Where would you look for that? And that then informs us about whether we are going down the right track. Because again, the guys who make this stuff, the developers, are really, really expensive. And so we want to try and get it right. This is some of the user testing we've done remotely. So we use a service where we pay them a bit of money. They go out and recruit people to do tests for us. So we're revamping the Top Gear reviews section, which, if I'm very lucky, went out at 3 o'clock today. The team in London are doing that. And they, so before today, a long time before today, about 12 weeks ago, we went out, recruited all these test users, asked them some questions, and what we get back is a video of them using the site. I'm hoping this is going to play the sound.
Yes.
Oh, ah.
Yes, behave. Let's have a look. So car feel quick enough. It's got 100 brake horsepower per tonne, so onto there. Don't like the blasphemy there. I'd probably stop reading the review at this point. Unnecessary. I don't understand why it's seen as acceptable to take the Lord's name in vain, but you couldn't say the F word or other rude sexual words, but for some reason it's acceptable to offend people's religious sensitivities, but not their sexual sensitivity.
So that was really interesting. That was a guy who was saying, he was a bit, he mumbled a little bit, but he was saying he really objected to the use of taking the Lord's name in vain in that review, which we were not expecting. But that wasn't particularly, we weren't particularly looking for feedback on the content of the reviews, but that was useful to feed back to the editorial team, because Top Gear, more than most websites, is about tone. It's obviously we take the tone from the show, and it's about being a bit punchy and a bit silly. But at the same time, if we want to not alienate people, then feedback like that is really useful. And probably no one in the office would be offended by, as the gentleman in the video said, that blasphemy, but he was. And so that's a decision that we have to make, is do we use that tone in future? This one again is fairly negative.
Difficult page to navigate on my screen. I've got a lot of different information pouring in from different sides, and the bit of the actual review that I want to read is very squished into the middle. It looks like it's covering the right kind.
So that cut off because that was the really useful bit. We've actually used quite a lot of feedback like that to change how the reviews section works.
All I seem to see on here,
if I'm honest, is adverts. So we've got adverts down the right hand side, adverts at the top, adverts to the left. Everything seems to have an advert, which is taking my eyes away from reading the actual short review in the middle. The review is not in depth as what car is. So, as we went through the pages earlier, it was all about the inside of the car, the boot of the car, the perspective of the car, the overall overview. This just seems to be an overview. I wouldn't call this a review. I would just call it an overview of what Top Gear felt about this vehicle.
So these things can be quite brutal. You've got to be really careful when you show them to editorial people, because it feels like if you're the person who wrote that review, it feels like they're really laying into you. But at the same time, it's really useful to know that those things that she identified as ads, they're not ads. They are us trying to say, here's something else you might be interested in. But if the user thinks they're ads, if the user thinks they're a distraction, then that's a problem for us. And that, again, is something we've tried to address in the new design. Here's a slightly...
Cheapest, okay, that's something new, where the fastest is cheapest and the greenest, because I tend to go for the greenest normally in terms of fuel economy, because obviously speed's not very important, and it's got the price there, which is good. I mean, 70.
Sometimes we get some nice bits and pieces out of the users. Here's another tool we use. This is called a heat map, and that, I don't know if you can particularly see it, but that's our video player behind. So that's a video of Chris Harris drifting a Porsche 911. And what we're measuring here, we've got a tool that sits in the background measuring whereabouts people click. So loads of people are clicking play. That's really good. A lot of people are clicking the video controls, which you can see along the bottom. Can't do much about the brightness. I don't know if anyone can guess what this massive thing here is. What was that? What about the ad? It is. That's exactly right. I wasn't expecting anyone to get that. But there you go. You're clearly all prolific users of the skip ad button, which is fine, because that's what it's there for. The ad is skippable for a reason, because ads annoy people. And if they're not interested, then we want to get them to the video as soon as possible. We've got another short quiz here. We're on till 4:15, aren't we? Yeah, cool. So these are two panels we did with We Buy Any Car. The left one is the one we started with. So it says, how much is your car worth? Get a free instant car valuation, put your reg number in and go. This sits on the reviews page. That's the BMW M135 review that you can see on the right. This one is, it wasn't performing enormously well. They asked us to change it. So we put this green flash on it. Join over 75,000 people who have sold to us. Can anyone, well, should we do a show of hands? Who thinks that the one on the right performed better than the one on the left? As in more people clicked on it. The one on the right? The one on the left. So that's what we thought. But it turns out that the one on the left performed much better. So we did what's called an A/B test. I shall explain that, but the orange thing is over time, number of people using the one on the left, and the blue one is the number of people using the one on the right. So it wasn't a disaster, but we were amazed to find that that green flash didn't do anything. Either, I mean, this is where you slightly get into a problem of not knowing what on earth you've been told, because we knew that it wasn't doing very well, we didn't know why, and we still don't. We can conjecture as to maybe it annoyed people, maybe for some reason that green flash meant they didn't see it, but there you go. So an A/B test is something we can do on the live Top Gear site. We can say, if we've got a new thing that we want to try, like the green flash, we can show it to X percentage of users. So in this case, we showed it to 5%. So if you come to the site, there's a 1 in 20 chance that you will see the one on the right. There's a 19 in 20 chance you'll see the one on the left. Because we don't want to annoy people. We don't want to just change things every time people come to the site. So this is why you limit an A/B test to a small number of people. And that then gives us this data, which we can go off and try and understand. I was reading an article on the train this morning that has some, this is just to finish off, has some interesting lessons for product and trying to figure out what people do online. Can anyone guess what this is? I assume not. This is the polar rations from Scott's Antarctic trip, which was over 100 years ago. Biscuits, pemmican, which is fat and meat bonded together, which is really nice. Sugar, butter, tea, cocoa. And this article that I was reading was about scurvy and how the British Navy cured scurvy or prevented scurvy in the 1750s by figuring out that for some reason, if you fed people lemons from Sicily, if you fed your sailors lemons, they wouldn't develop scurvy. And this gave the British incredible sea superiority because the ships could stay out at sea for 2 years at a time if they took the daily ration of lemon juice. But they didn't know why the lemons were doing this. So they, at some point, because it was cheaper, they switched to Jamaican limes. Jamaican limes turn out to contain only a quarter of the vitamin C that lemons do. And the vitamin C is what prevents scurvy. But at the same time, people had invented the steamships. The ships were much faster, so they didn't have to stay out for 2 years. And what that had the effect of doing was hiding the fact that the Navy had was no longer preventing scurvy. They thought it was the limes in the rum, but it turned out to be it was just the fact that the sailors weren't staying at sea any longer. And Scott's trip was a disaster, partly because they took all these limes along and various other things that they thought would cure scurvy, and they just didn't. And to cut a long story short, a lot of them died because of it. So this is this is a part of the article, which again I'll send round. It's really interesting. So they had a theory of the disease that made sense, it fit the evidence, but it was utterly wrong. In one sense, the additional leap required for a correct understanding was very small. In another sense, it would have required a kind of Copernican revolution in their thinking. So the point I'm trying to make, what does this have to do with us, is that it's really hard to understand all that data. We have access to all this data. but making the right decision is really difficult. The advantage for you is that nobody knows what they're doing. People think they know what they're doing, and some people don't think they know what they're doing, but people are trying stuff. This is like big publishers, us, ITV, I could say, Channel 4, the BBC, BuzzFeed, the New York Times, the Washington Post. Nobody actually knows what they're doing online. Nobody knows how to make money. No one knows how to make a sustainable future for journalism, and that's a big opportunity for people to try new stuff and just see what works. There's another reason not to believe data, or not to believe easy conclusions of data. This was after the debate. More people were searching for info on our future leaders on Google than for porn. So that's true. But I had a look at this, and it turns out nobody searches for porn on Google, or at least you don't search for the word porn on its own. You search for other stuff. So the yellow line is porn, the blue line is Clinton, the red line is Trump. Here, you've got the blue line is porn. That's people searching for the word Google on Google. And that's people searching for Facebook on Google. So I think you've got to be really careful about the conclusions that you draw from this data. And that applies whether you're doing product stuff with it or whether you're writing about the data. You've just got to be really careful about the conclusions that you draw and the assumptions that you're making. So to conclude, here is the closing scene of the film Burn After Reading, which I think encapsulates my thoughts about how to understand data.
What did we learn, Palmer?
I don't know, sir.
I don't fucking know either. I guess we learned not to do it again.
Yes, sir.
Well, I'm fucked if I know what we did.
Yes, sir. It's hard to say.
Jesus fucking Christ.
I do apologise for the swearing and for the blasphemy there, but that I think does encapsulate where we are as an industry. We try and do stuff. If it works, we don't know why. If it doesn't work, we don't know why. But we try and figure it out, and we try and get better at it. Thank you very much. Any questions? Anything you can ask about Top Gear and about Clarkson. I may not be able to answer it, but do ask. Oh, sorry. I will. Yeah, we'll all be watching. We're pretty excited about the Grand Tour. It'll be really interesting to see what they come up with. They've got a lot of money. Top Gear is an expensive show to make. The Grand Tour is probably twice as expensive, possibly more. But I think it's going to be really interesting. That was a note that I wrote myself. I didn't actually make it into a slide, but just as an aside, I do miss being a journalist, and I miss writing. And I think if you go into other stuff, there's really exciting stuff to do, but you will miss it. Anyway, Grand Tour. Yes, it'll be really interesting to see what they come up with.
What's the breakdown of advertising across all the BBC platforms? So obviously in TV they don't advertise, but in terms of the other platforms.
What do you mean?
Like, would you have a various amount of advertising on the BBC Two website, Top Gear, BBC Sport, and other
So we carry advertising on what we call our commercial websites. So that is Top Gear, it's Good Food, it's things like the CBeebies magazine website, doctorwho.tv, but anything that's paid for with public money, it's kind of, you sort of open a can of worms. It's kind of a really arcane and boring thing that I can explain in the pub if you're really interested. But anything that's paid for with the license fee doesn't carry advertising. That's by law. It's guaranteed by the BBC's charter, we're not allowed to put advertising on it. So that's why we have two food websites. We've got BBC Food, which carries all the recipes from Saturday Kitchen and whatever, and we've got BBC Good Food, which is independent of any shows. We don't carry the recipes from any of the shows, and that means we can put advertising on. Because the BBC Food website, which carries the recipes from the shows, is license fee funded. You know, if you've paid for those shows through your license fee and you want to cook whatever Rick Stein did on Saturday Kitchen, it's only fair that you should be able to do that without having to pay for it through ads. Yeah, it's a really arcane distinction. Nobody in the BBC understands it, but there you go. Anyone else?
Another one, Jack. Go for it.
What do you mean about the David Clarkson's comments he made earlier this week?
Which ones?
The ones he said Top Gear's programs got bigger and bigger.
Top Gear's?
Programs got bigger and bigger. He accused the BBC of lack of support.
I didn't hear those. That's interesting. I'd probably better not address that because it'll just make its way into a newspaper at some point. What I will say is that Jeremy was on... No, Andy Willman, who's the producer of Top Gear, who's almost, well, very much the fourth member of that trio. Andy was on Today this morning on Radio 4, and he was very complimentary about the BBC. He said they were hands-off. You know, Amazon were just as hands-off as the BBC had been editorially. But I have very little to do with the TV show, so I'm going to respectfully decline to address that comment. Anything else?
Okay, before I thank Anthony and close up, I just want a couple of announcements. On Friday, at the end of Journalism Week, we've just been informed that we have some of our budget left over, so we're going to give you some drinks vouchers. That's on Friday at the end of Journalism Week. So if you come and see one of your tutors, we'll give you a drinks voucher, then they'll get you a squash or something a bit stronger in our university pub. Okay? And the other announcement is that Anthony's heading back down to London. It's at 7.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to head down the hill to the Old Ball, where we are going to drink a squash or something a bit stronger as well. So you're welcome to join us there. Thank you so much for coming up. I thought that was very insightful. Thank you very much. There's no sugar in here.